Hey Tim, look at this.
Needs work.
Hey Tim, how about this?
Still needs work.
Darn it. How about this?
Nice, high five.
Hey everybody, how's it going?
My name's Tim.
And my name's Michael.
And you're watching TMI.
That's the Tim and Michael Information Show. We are so excited to be back
Yes.
doing this again on a semi-regular basis.
We kept the ball rolling.
So what is this episode about?
I am really excited for tonight's episode. We are going to talk about comic books, which is one of my favorite things in the world. And specifically, the question I want to postulate tonight is, what is the difference between a comic book and a graphic novel? Those are two words we hear all the time. I think they're used pretty interchangeably. In fact, if you go to Barnes & Noble, they don't have a comic book section. They have a graphic novel section. Yeah.
This is going to be a precursor to a video that's coming later, so
Yes.
stay tuned for our top 5 comic picks for what was it again?
Non-Marvel and non-DC. We're going non-mainstream.
Non-mainstream. So I'm going to quickly interject with a little bit of prehistory here.
Sure.
So for anybody that remembers as far back as our entertainment goes, serials, or the idea of serials, came from radio plays, where you only got a piece of a person's story all week. And we were used to that for the longest time. A lot of our TV shows still do that. I mean, we got pretty lucky in the 90s with, I remember Batman the Animated Series being on 5 days a week. I remember Power Rangers being on 5 days a week, But a lot of the tradition of things still carries to this day that you had to wait a week. Or, in the case of when we started getting comics, how often would those come out? Like some of the early Detective Comics, was it like a monthly thing featured, or was it a weekly thing featured?
You know something, I couldn't say that authoritatively because I'm not really an expert on that period, but I would venture to probably say a month.
Okay.
That seems fair.
So my quick, wrapping that up, my quick perspective of what really, really makes a difference between a comic and a graphic novel. Comic book series are meant to be a series. The great thing about it is you can have issue number 1 and it can go to issue number 240 whatever. That story can just keep evolving as it wants to, and the great thing is it's a really small commitment because you just get to read a couple pages. And the nice thing is you may think, oh, I'm done reading it, but if you really go back and look at it, you have a whole, waiting until the next one comes out, a whole moment to really just sit and actually look at that comic. And that's just those few pages. That's why it's that thin. Now, a graphic novel, a novel can exist on its own as a book, and they tend to be a lot thicker because there's a lot more involved. And I'm not just saying that size doesn't matter, but it really has to do with, can it be a self-contained story, I believe? Because even Harry Potter has several series in it, but it is still a novel, as opposed to when you also get, and I'm not naming any particular ones because we're saving that, but there are some graphic novels that also have series to them. But even picking up one of them on its own is a big commitment because you're reading so much and you're also looking at so much. So that's my big difference for me, at least my definition, how I separate those two.
Yeah, I think we're pretty much in harmony on those. The way I really classify the differences, I see like comic books as a TV series, like you mentioned, as this ongoing thing, whereas a graphic novel is more like a feature film. It's got a specific scope. And I mean, obviously feature films have sequels and can go on and on and on and on, as we're seeing now that we've just had, like Transformers 5 this last summer. But, you're not getting a new one every single week like a TV show. It's kind of a finite, limited, big event type thing. And the interesting thing, like you pointed out, is there is some overlap where you do have some graphic novels that start out as a series, and I think one name that would be safe to drop because it is DC would be Watchmen, which started as 12, I think, monthly issues, and then now if you get it, it's all collected into one volume and reads very nicely, like one volume. So,
and I deal with that a lot these days too, which is kind of confusing for some people because you'll pick up these collections that are not necessarily were started as graphic novels, but when you get them in volume 1, 2, and 3, you're actually getting issues 1 through 25, and then 26 through, etc., etc.
Right.
I also think when you are specifically designing a graphic novel, you get a little bit more leeway with your arc. You know what I mean? With your climax. I feel like
Yeah, definitely.
every comic book has some sort of a cliffhanger at the end of it that just makes you like,
Yes.
what am I gonna do?
Yes.
I gotta read. Now, a graphic novel doesn't necessarily have to have the risk-taking cliffhanger at the end of every page. There's a little bit of that. There's a little bit of what makes you go on to the next one. But if you actually sit back and look at the whole arc of the story, it may not be the most detrimental thing within the confines of that story. You know, so I think it's another thing. Graphic novels are less of a heart attack. I don't know.
Perhaps, yeah.
But now that I think about it, I'm going to go back to one of my collections that I have. I have like a 3-volume collection so far of a particular series, and I'm going to see if reading it in that format, if I feel less of the cliffhanger because I have it all in one place. I don't know. It's an interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point because I tend to read all my comic books kind of like the graphic novels, and I don't do it the way you're supposed to, where you go to the comic book store once a month. We have enough comics history that I just go to the library and check out the collections that have 6, 7, 8 issues in them for whatever title and read them that way. So, again, that has that kind of fluid storyline where you're going in and out of plots and narratives tend to sort of blend together. And then you always get to like that last page of the collection and there's that like cliffhanger like, oh, so-and-so doesn't exist, or oh, this person just died, and that was originally published as part of a monthly series, and there's going to be, after issue number 6, 7, 8, 9, but it just so happens that this collection I got from the library ends on number 6, and I'm like, what? That's not what I wanted.
Did you, speaking of 90s
Yeah.
and episodes, did you ever watch Doug?
I did not.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
There's this great episode for anybody who's watched Doug. Leave a comment. And there's a fabulous episode, Man O' Steel Man. Man O' Steel Man is what it was called. The author of this long-running comic series was releasing the final one. And Doug went out to the comic store to get the final Man O' Steel Man comic. And he owned every single Man O' Steel Man comic except for issue number 1, the coveted number 1. Now, the whole thing about that is suddenly, like, he sees it in a store because the comic book owner has it, like, right behind, like,
Right.
on a little shelf.
The holy grail
It
of the
is.
shop.
It's
yeah.
the holy grail of the shop, exactly. And he's like, oh, but it's not for sale. And Doug's like, oh, man. But then suddenly, Doug, sees this guy selling, comics out of a trunk. And then he's like, well, I'll see what the guy has. And the guy has it, so he buys it from him at a pretty reasonable price because the guy's selling stuff out of his trunk. But then he finds out later that the guy's store was robbed.
Oh.
And then and then Doug puts 2 and 2 together. And so it's this whole thing, like, he's finally got his whole collection, but what does he do? You should watch the episode, figure out what he does.
I kind of want to know. That's actually really mature sounding for
It is! Plus,
1990s cartoon.
when there's something about when they draw, like, there's an overhead shot in the beginning of the episode when he's got them all fanned out. And he's missing number 1, but still looking at the entire collection, knowing that you've got a definitive collection of a particular length of comic. I think anybody who watches, we've already talked about how you're really big on Marvel, and I'm pretty big on DC.
Right.
But I think that we can each prospectively say that there is some series that have ended definitively, and then they do reboots all of a sudden, and you're like, oh, yeah, now we've got, Batman Detective, just where it says Detective Comics at the end. Batman Dark Knight, Dark Knight Returns. There's all these different, lines that are going. I really want to collect every Michael Turner Supergirl because I remember buying issue number 1 in a Borders.
Nice.
Long time
Don't
ago.
date yourself, sir.
I like myself. I'll date myself. Yeah. And I remember ever since that Doug episode, every time I do get an issue 1, sometimes that's all I need, is just getting issue 1, and I'm happy with that. So, but I definitely want a Michael Turner complete that whole thing anyways. Did we discuss our difference? Did we clip that?
I think we did. I think we, in thinking about this episode and preparing for it, it was a pretty clear-cut difference in my head, and I think you pegged it right off the bat, and I pegged it right off the bat, and wow, that was pretty straightforward.
Okay, so
yeah.
let's go ahead and go on to the next one. Thanks for watching this one, and let's go ahead and see which 5 comics each. We don't know which we've got either,
Yeah,
so
we don't.
stay tuned for the next one, guys.
All right. See ya.